We are talking about the unseen donors, specifically women, but other unseen donors as well.
Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, Amy Eisenstein and Andrea Kihlstedt, co-founders of Capital Campaign Pro, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. Here are your hosts, Amy and Andrea.
Hi, I'm Amy Eisenstein. I'm here with my co-host and colleague and co-founder, Andrea Kihlstedt, as always. And today, we actually have a very special guest with us. Andrea is going to introduce her, but normally when we have a guest, it's just me or Andrea, but we're so excited to talk to our guest today that we're both here. Andrea, why don't you introduce Kathleen?
Thanks, Amy. I am so tickled to be here with Kathleen Loehr. Now, I've known Kathleen for some time, and Kathleen is a great friend of other people who are connected with Capital Campaign Pro. And Kathleen is the foremost expert in and guru of women in philanthropy. Women and how women give, how women think about giving. Such a great topic, right? She is a well-known author. In fact, she wrote a book on that topic, Gender Matters, A Guide to Growing Women's Philanthropy. So if you're interested in this, check that book out. Kathleen is also on the Women's Philanthropy Institute Advisory Council. All these mouthfuls of words, Kathleen, but the gist of the matter is that Kathleen knows more about how women give, why they give, how they think about money, how that interprets how we in the fundraising business should function. And that's a topic that most of us have really never thought about. So we're thrilled to have her with us. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, both of you. It's fun to be here with you.
So Kathleen, we are going to focus today on 3 or 4 principles and practices that you've identified as really key to thinking about women, as you say, as unseen donors. So why don't you give us a little background and then share some of your key principles?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. I can give you a shorthand. Just take this away. Women's wealth is rising. Over the last 40 years, earning more, making more of those decisions in the household, CEO titles, you name it, we're on the mark.
Yes.
Getting that money. Yes.
And I just say yes.
Yes, me too.
The other thing is we give more. There's so much research coming out of the Women's Philanthropy Institute over now 15 years showing how we make those decisions, give more to more charities and causes we care about. And the third thing is that we give differently, not right or wrong, just differently. A way of approaching it is much more collaborative, engaged with all of our assets. So that shorthand, more money, giving more, and giving differently. So with that work that I've done over many, many clients, many, many years, and writing the book about this and listening deeply, I've really come up with things that we as fundraisers need to pay attention to. And before I get into the what we can do and what we pay attention to, I want to just bring us to who we are as fundraisers. So I was trained with best practices by some incredible fundraisers. Everybody who's hired today is being trained on similar best practices. We put those best practices in place because we know they work. We raise how many billions of dollars a year over and over, plus more. And yet we have to recognize best practices have been put in place from the 70s, from what was known then as the prototypical donor. That would be primarily white, primarily straight, primarily male. No right or wrong. We should not stop using best practices that work with that donor. But when we apply those practices to those who are unseen, unlistened to back in the 70s, they don't always resonate. And that's really the core of the work I've been doing. What does resonate? And what I find resonates, and as Amy, you said, I'll be talking about women, but we're finding it applies to many, many unseen donors of all different races and ethnicities and just how they are showing up today. What does resonate is with women, we want to be seen and valued for all that we are, and not just what I call the walking pocketbook. So the principles that I've come up with really starts with that. It starts with facing into, as I'm facing into you two today, facing into who's in front of us and being curious and asking questions. So the first thing anyone can do, and it's the first principle, and by the way, these principles are not in order. All 6 you can find on the website I'll give you later. All 6 are interwoven. But a really good first one to start is start with that curiosity. Start with your feeling of, I don't really know perhaps how those who identify as women are giving to me. So you go into your database, you look for frequency, you look for size of gifts, you try to understand who's the decision maker. Those are curiosity things you can work with your team to find out. You also have to check assumptions. The first principle is start and look for insights. And one insight I've had is all of the models we have for projecting wealth, for looking at one's background, what they might be able to give, actually are models based on, again, males of a career trajectory, males who have certain titles, males who stay in the workforce, don't go in and out. So we have to assume we're not seeing it all, and that's a fact. Men are giving to the 12 charities that are out there, the categories. Men are giving to only 6 of them. Women are giving to 11. So we're spreading our wealth. So we have to start by assuming our assumptions aren't right. We may not be seeing all that she's giving, and we may not know how she's giving. So that's really the first principle.
Let me just jump in and say, I think that's so important to start with curiosity. I love that. We definitely want to look at our donors' history, right? How recently they've given, how frequently they've given, how much they've given. But, something else that you said about assumptions really struck me, because haven't we all been in a room? Well, maybe not all of us, but certainly I can relate. My husband and I are standing somewhere and people talk to him. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the one who's going to make the decision on whatever given topic we're talking about. And, whether it's a maintenance person or a vendor or contractor or a lawyer or whoever we're working with, they're directing the questions at him. And I'm the driver of the decisions, or certain decisions, certainly in our household. And I think that that's one of the things that we're talking about here today. So thank you for pointing that out. I just wanted to throw in a personal example.
Mm-hmm. Well, don't get me started, Amy, because the number of times that things are misaddressed, addressed to him and not to her, or invitations are put out. It's just, we move. That's one thing I want to say about our best practices. They allow us to move effectively and efficiently in our work and get things done. But when we move so fast, we're not taking a beat and double checking. Is that practice going to work in this situation? Who am I not including? Who am I not speaking to? So those are just ways of adapting our behaviors. And so the first principle allows us to catch ourselves and start with insight. What do we think we know, but can we check it? And what have we never even looked at, and can we learn more? The second principle starts with the women. And this is where a big differentiator is, I find, between donors who have been seen for a long time, the last 50 plus years, and women and all other donors, we've not been seen. So if we don't start with them and listen to them, we're again making assumptions. Well, this worked before. I can get my case out there and I can put it in front of you and you're going to say yes. Well, not so fast. So if we start by asking questions directly of women, interviews, focus groups, bringing a small group in, taking part of the board, saying, well, what do you think? We get a lot of input. And to be honest, women are paying attention. Just because we may not be paying as good attention to them, they pay attention to what they care about. And they'll have ideas, and they'll respond to priorities, and they'll respond to curiosity about how can we bring more like you in. There's a gaining of intel here in the second principle that makes all the difference for the success we're seeing in the amounts that women are now giving, because they feel not just seen, but they feel trust. This is a little aside. It's not directly on the principles, but it's another big part of women's philanthropy, which is it's the third principle. Women give more than just treasure. You know, we talk about 3 T's, right? Time, talent, and treasure. I think there are at least 6. I would add to those 3, trust. Are you coming to me just really for my money, or are you coming to me as a partner? We work together in trust? Ties is, who do I know? You're not keeping in touch, but I'm keeping in touch with them. I can bring my network forward if I trust you. And then testimony. I'm shy about talking about you if I'm not quite sure about how you're going to use my names, my contacts, me. So all of that whole bringing together is an important part of going to women and asking for their input and listening deeply about what they want to bring forward for this particular cause that they care about.
Yeah, I love it. Andrea, you've been quiet. What thoughts are you thinking?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. You know, what I'm thinking about is that I think there are a lot of women who have come into their money through men, right? Perhaps through their husbands, perhaps through their fathers, perhaps that there are a lot of women who haven't earned their money through their careers early on, or if they have, maybe they've had later careers, right, to earn, as I have, to earn their money. So you can't make assumptions, I think, about how women relate to their money, because those relationships are often very complicated, right? The relationships between a woman who has philanthropic resources of some significance, but that money sort of is come from the husband who has given it to the wife. So you're focused on curiosity, right? On wanting to understand what that feels like, how a woman thinks about her resources and how she gives them away is a much more complicated and rich conversation than you might imagine.
It is. It very much is. I often start every interview, every casual conversation is, tell me about you. How do you think about your philanthropy? And give me a story of one moment in your philanthropic journey that gives you great joy. You're going to learn so much about motivation, about choice, about who was involved, who the decision maker is, just by listening to that story. So you're so right.
So interesting that's sort of where your mind went, Andrea. You know, it's no secret we're of different generations. And I just assume that women are earning their money now. I don't assume that it's coming from their husbands or their fathers. Certainly. So that goes back to not making assumptions, being curious. And I think that there probably are more complicated relationships. Even when women do earn their money, they feel really differently about it and how they use it. So I think it's an important thing to think about. But my assumption today is that women donors have earned their money. And sometimes it's probably true and sometimes it's not.
Is it? I want to pick up on one thing you said, Andrea, about how these conversations are more complex, and you went on to say enrich, and I totally agree with both. And one thing I hear from fundraisers is, it takes time to ask these questions. So let me tell this story. This is from my university. I was going into my 35th reunion, and I had run reunions at that university, so I knew the drill. So they were emailing me, and they were sending the letters, and it was June 12th, I think, of the year, and the year ends on June 30th. And I still hadn't made my gift, and I get a call. It doesn't matter if it was male or female, but this is how the call went. It was, Kathleen, I know that you know it's your reunion, and I know you care about Cornell based on everything you've done before. Tell me, what are you thinking? What are some values you have that you want to see reflected in this year's gift? Or is there anything you need to hear from us to help make your choice? That conversation probably took 4 minutes, and I surprised myself by giving 3 times more than I was going to give, because I was just asked these rich questions and it was two-sided and I was in a conversation. So is 4 minutes really so hard to find to ask curious questions and get the woman's input? So that's just something I want to leave with the audience as you think about starting yourself and get going on this. Yeah.
I think that's such a great point. What other tips do you have, Kathleen, of how people can be more focused on unseen donors in general, but specifically women? I think that 4-minute example is perfect because I was thinking, although I didn't articulate it, it does sound like a lot of time. It sounds like so much work. So how do we implement these things in a practical way? You just gave us one great example. What are some other sort of practical takeaways for listeners of how they can engage these specifically women donors?
So I'll jump to the fifth principle, which is essentially just start. Don't have it perfect. Don't have it tied up with a bow. Don't even begin to think you know everything. Just start. Start by doing some data mining and learning what's happening right in front of you that you just haven't looked at. Start by asking these questions. Start by being curious when you're meeting at any time, any donor, all unseen donors, about asking about them first over what you want to say, which often is our goal, our campaign, our case, whatever. And I know that we are trained in this. I absolutely know this, that we do ask questions, of course, but there's an orientation. People have to understand that when we're in a meeting and we've got pressure on us to meet our goals, and there's a time pressure, how much we meet or time have with the donor, that we, in that pressure, sometimes revert to what we've always done before rather than staying open and loose and asking, say more. Can you tell me more about that? I'm curious about that. So there's an orientation to at least just start with questions with true curiosity rather than I'm supposed to do this and then I'll move on to what I want to say. That energy is so different and donors pick up on that. So the just starting means you might just take across these summer months, the 3 months, and just try to find an annual fund breakout of your donors and how they're giving across class years if you're in a university, or how they're giving against programs if it's a nonprofit, and learning. And then you find some top donors and then you might say, I'm really curious. And then you pick up the phone and you make some of those phone calls. We do have a website to help get you started. We can put that up, but it's at Indiana University. I've given a lot of this material to the Women's Philanthropy Institute, and it's called Proven Practices.
So what's the website, Kathleen?
Let me just pull that up.
Okay, and while you're doing that, one of the things that you talked about in our before we hit the record button was that women are the drivers of donations. Talk a little bit about, if you can, the research or why you say that women are the drivers of donations. What does that mean and why should people care? I mean, you started with women are making more, women are giving more, and I love that. I think let's just go back a little bit to the why, and then you can tell us that website.
Of course. So one of our very first studies at Women's Philanthropy Institute, our research was to check how the households were giving. And we did that in 2005, and we repeated it in 2020. And I say that because that longitudinal view has given us even more information. So back in 2005, we found that couples were making jointly decisions 75% of the time. So she's in the decision 75% of the time. And the rest, whether either she or he, or whatever the identifier is. The 2020 is that they're making joint decisions 62% of the time. Let me say that again. We found in 2020 that women are making with their spouse joint decisions 62% of the time. So still the majority, but if you heard the difference in number, it has dropped. So they're making 62% with a spouse in those conversations. But what has grown is that the woman is deciding uniquely another 13% of the time. And she's also making separate on her own decisions. So if you combine all that together, 82% of the time, the women are part of the philanthropic decisions in that household. So that's big. That really is big. That you really aren't anywhere from whether you give to the corner handout store or to your university. They're in the conversation. So we have to assume that and invite them to the conversation with us. Did that answer, Amy?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Andrea, do you want to ask any other questions before Kathleen gives us that website?
Yes, I have one more question, Kathleen. It's sort of a big question, but maybe you have a short answer for it. We can get you back another time. I think there many people make the assumption, and I don't know if it's true or not, that men tend to be more comfortable giving bigger gifts than women. And I'm wondering from your perspective if that in fact is the case, and if you see that changing over time.
I'll start with the last, Andrea, which is, yes, I see that changing. Of course, we all see the big headlines with Mackenzie Scott and Melinda, et cetera. But we're also seeing it in news that's coming out of various charities and universities. The reason that's changing, I would put on the table is, yes, women's wealth is rising. They feel they can give more, but also we're telling more of those stories. I hear women don't hear enough stories about others like them giving. They don't know the philanthropic journey. They don't know what it takes to start and then grow and test and go forward. All the headlines have been the big, big gifts and the names on buildings. You walk on any nonprofit or campus, what are the names? And so the more visibility we can give to women giving, the more we will get more giving, large gifts. The second thing I want to say is we do not celebrate collective giving. And some of the biggest giving that I'm seeing collectively is coming from groups. So Women Moving Millions, a collection of women who just are raising over $1 billion for the Jewish Federation, the collection of women who just gave to the university, and all of them stretched, and they never dreamed that they would give collectively $10 million in 1 year, and they thought it would take 5, and they did it in 1 year. So these collectives are now stories that are also coming out. So both the individual stepping into more giving, and she might give it more in a collective, and an individual stepping into more giving, and she might get more of a headline. Both of those stories need to be told.
Giving is just so interesting, because when I think of, I have a hard time imagining men wanting to give collectively. That when men give collectively, they're vying for who's going to get the top spot, right? When women give collectively, they're vying to come together to do something bigger than they might think of individually. So I think it's just such a big difference, and something that's such an important point.
Andrea, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think both of those examples that you gave, Kathleen, both the collective giving, the giving circles we're hearing more and more about, are critically important. And also these role models that you named, Mackenzie Scott and Melinda Gates, are serving as role models. If women don't know that women make these big gifts, now they do. And it's really inspiring and motivating. And I think we're going to see more and more of it. So I'm so glad you raised those points.
Can I tell a quick story before we're over? I've just finished a tremendously successful capital campaign for a small organization where they ended up raising much more money than they ever imagined. And when we sat down to look and see what actually happened, it turned out that 5 of the top donors, of the 6-figure donors, were women. 5 of them were women. So we started imagining, well, what would it be when the building is finally complete to actually invite them quietly together to come to a little tea party or a champagne brunch in the new building? Just these 5 women who anchored that campaign, right? It was so surprising and so interesting.
That is fabulous. I can't wait to see what stories you create out of that. And then the modeling that'll go from peer to peer. That's super.
Yeah. All right, Kathleen, what's that website we want to send people
it's at
to?
Indiana University. That's where WPI is housed. And the website is WPI Proven Practices. All one word. WPI Proven Practices .indianapolis.iu.
Okay. And if you just Google WPI, proven practices, it pops right up. You can find it. Excellent. Yeah. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom. I think what you've shared is inspiring and motivating, and I can't wait to see this rolled out in campaigns across the country and around the world.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, visit capitalcampaignpro.com, where you'll find all the help you'll need for your campaign. And please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you.